You are listening to Exploring Sacred with your host, Denise Iwana Francisco, on the Temple Within Radio and Digital Media Network, giving voice to the sacred.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday morning here in the Enchanted Forest. It looks enchanted. Everything is snow-covered and kind of shiny and magical outside from my view here in the studio, here in my office. Welcome to everybody who is joining us. I'm going to go ahead and post the chat room page here in Exploring Sacred. And welcome you to take a deep breath this morning, because perhaps you haven't done that yet today. Oh, goodness. Okay, please join us in the chat room. Here we are. So come on in if you are so inclined to do so. If not, that's fine too. Just hang out and have a listen to what we're talking about this morning. It's a subject, frankly, that a lot of people bring up. And finally I decided, well, perhaps it's time to talk about this. I was having a text message chat, as I do just about every day, with my dear friend David Sturkin, and he and I were talking about spiritual doorways and gateways and portals to the other side, and learning things that perhaps we're not yet meant to learn about. And why is that we're not supposed to go poking our nose around in every little thing that brings interest our way? Good morning, New Joy. It's good to have you in the chat room. I want to make sure that I greet everybody that comes in. Good morning. Why is that? Why is it that some doors are meant to stay closed? You know, really, when I think about spirituality, I think about it as a pretty basic matter, or a very practical matter. Just like some relationships, once they have ended, they just need to stay ended. It just needs to stay right there with that door shut. Thank you for the lessons that I've learned. Thank you for what you've taught me. I love you, and I let you go. And I let you go with love. And the door is shut. The season has ended. Sometimes those doors need to remain shut. Sometimes those doors never need to be opened. Isn't that amazing how we can feel sometimes in relationship? You know, I don't really know about that relationship or that situation or that job. I don't really know about that, but we, despite our better judgment and our intuition, we open up that door. And then we think to ourselves, what was I thinking? I never should have opened that door. I knew that door should have stayed closed. And I went and I opened it anyway. It's like releasing all the bats in the belfry, right? All of a sudden, there's chaos, right? And we learn in those situations, of course, and every situation brings its own form of teachings and lessons to be learned, and spiritual, mental, emotional growth that comes with living the human life. When it comes to spiritual doorways, there are doors that just shouldn't be opened. There are some doors that I don't ever care to open. There are certain doors that I will not open until I am properly prepared to open them. Why is that? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Good morning, Robin McCarthy. It's great to have you in the chat room. Thank you for being here. And if you have any questions, those of you in the chat room, please chime in, ask your questions. Let's have a conversation about this. I have a feeling that this is going to be something that we'll talk about again next Wednesday, because it's a vast conversation to have. Just like in the physical realm, there are aspects of the non-physical realm that are friendly, loving, light-filled, joyful, all of those good sorts of things. And then there are aspects of the spiritual realms that frankly are dangerous. No different than being here on the earth plane, right? I call it the playground of spirit. The playground of spirit, you know, it includes those friends of ours that are allies, that are guardians, that are teachers, that are ascended. And the playground also contains those that would wish to harm, that would wish to bully, that would wish perhaps to trick you or to take something from you. If we think about it in those terms, that's how I like to think about things, because it conjures up a visual of what I'm talking about. Just as every gift that any one of us has ever been given has stages of learning and grasping and accelerating, honing and mastering. And it doesn't matter if you are an artist, if you are an orator, if you are a wonderful friend, whatever your gifts happen to be that Creator gifted you with before you were brought to this earth plane. Well, some people are born a prodigy. Some people are born absolutely right out of the chute, already masters, right? They've already mastered music. And we hear about those people, and perhaps we've met a few in our lifetimes. They're savants of some sort sometimes. But most of us, I would have to say, it's a gradual learning process, honing our skills, our gifts, our talents. And ultimately, if we practice and learn and hone enough, we become a master at our skill, at our gifts and our talents. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes levels of understanding and graduations and passages from one level to the next level, until we have attained a certain understanding or knowledge base that brings us to the next level. It's kind of like school for the soul. School for the soul. We can think about it with regard to sports as well. I mean, I certainly would not have thrown my 5-year-old son the first time he was on ice skates, right? Teaching him how to skate with a hockey stick at 5 years old. I would not have thrown him into an arena of high school hockey players or travel hockey players or NHL hockey players, right? Gradually, he learned to be an astounding hockey player. And at the age of 15, my son was recruited by the World Hockey Academy in Canada to come and play, the youngest player ever to be asked to come and join that international hockey team. It took him 10 years to build up his skills and relentless practice and self-discipline to get to that place. Ultimately, he decided it wasn't for him, and that's okay. He wanted to dedicate the rest of his life to something different than hockey. But the fact that he attained it, that he opened those doors, and he did it in the proper way so that he wasn't injured, that he was mentally, emotionally, physically prepared. The same thing is true when we're learning about things in the hidden realms. The first time I went into a Toys R Us and I realized that Toys R Us sold Ouija boards, I just about fainted in the aisle. I just about fainted in the aisle. I was with my, good morning, Julie Hedges. Good to see you in the house this morning. I was in the aisle with my husband doing some Christmas shopping for nieces and nephews, and I saw that there was a Ouija board game. And I looked at that and I thought, well, this must be an offshoot of the Ouija board that I'm thinking about from the 70s. And lo and behold, no, it's actually out there as a game. As a game. Long time ago, well, 12, almost 13 years ago, my Native American teacher, mentor, who gifted me my Hochoka, my altar, he looked at me very seriously and he said, you know, the spirits told me that you would be coming and that I'm supposed to train you in these ways. I'm supposed to teach you these ways so that you'll keep them in a good way. And he is a very imposing figure. Those of you that know him know he has an imposing energy. Wakian Snamani Sr. And he looked at me and he said to me, remember, these things are nothing to mess around with. These chanupas, these ceremonies, these are nothing to mess around with. If you mess around with them, you're going to get hurt. David Sturkin and I were just talking about that the other evening as we were chatting back and forth. which brought me to a conversation that I had had when I was 15 years old with Father Kussler there in Apple Valley, Minnesota. And I said to him, Father, why is it that I can see people who are supposed to be dead? Why is that? I don't think anybody else in my confirmation class is seeing people who are supposed to be dead. And Father, why is it that I can see angels and other creatures that other people just can't see? And he looked at me and very seriously, he said, you know, Catherine Therese, he called me by my confirmation name. These are very serious matters. And I understand what you're saying because I am an ordained exorcist. I was just at an exorcism last week. Well, of course, that sent shivers right up my spine, right? Holy buckets. And he looked at me and he said, the responsibility of the gifts that God gave you is just that. It's a responsibility, Catherine Therese. And if you could do your best to be a child, to be a young girl, to be a teenager, rather than to dive right into what this gift is going to bring to you, I would suggest that you do that. Try to be a teenager. And one day, someone will come along in your life and they will explain to you the gifts that you're talking about. He said, we call it the gifts of the charismata, the gifts of the Spirit. And they're very serious matters, Catherine Therese. And I thanked him. And exactly 15 years later is when I met my spiritual director at the Dominican Center, Charmaine Kolchak. And she said almost the exact same thing after I went through some spiritual testing and analysis. Right? Who knew? People say, what do you mean testing and analysis? The Catholic Church does that? Well, yeah, your spiritual director. If you happen to be lucky enough to have a Dominican spiritual director, there are certain tests for your proclivities that you are put through. Right? Tests, conversations, papers that you fill out about being clairvoyant, about being clairsentient, all of those good sorts of things, so that they can kind of understand where to direct you, how to direct you. And when I was done with all of that and I was brought back in so that, Charmaine could say to me, according to the Catholic canon, you are a seer, you are a sensitive. She looked at me very seriously and she said, you do realize, Denise, that for the rest of your life, the darkness will be nipping at your heels. I said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Charmaine? That doesn't sound very glamorous. I don't think I like that idea. And she said to me, and I'm so glad she said it to me, your gifts, like anyone else's gifts on this planet, on this earth, will be tested every day of your life. It will be tested by the darkness in some way, shape, or another to see exactly how you're going to use your gifts and talents. And this is why, Denise, you are not taught about these things in catechism. Because these are very serious matters. The unseen world is a very serious place. It is real. Mystics have always existed, and they didn't die during the medieval times. They've always existed. They have gone underground, and the church doesn't talk about it because there are certain doorways and gateways that you must be prepared to enter before you enter. And I sat with that for a moment. And I sat with that for days. And that's when I met Sister Irene Mary. Now, most of you have heard me talk about Irene Mary, who I absolutely, positively adore. She's a Dominican sister. And she always said to me, Denise, always remember that the work that you do with the gifts that God gave you, it's soul work. You're working with people's souls. You're speaking to their souls. It's not a sideshow. It's not a freak show. Right? It's a gift. And it's a gift in which you are working in hidden chambers of a person's heart and a person's soul that very few people are allowed to enter. You must be very careful. And in my learning process and in going through the different levels of understanding and bridging my Catholicism with carrying the Chanupa, the sacred pipe, right? You can't just negate the fact that I grew up Catholic. I don't mind the fact that I grew up Catholic, frankly. I'm not a recovering Catholic. I'm not an angry Catholic. I'm not any of those things. It's how I was raised. It was how my birth mother wanted me to be raised. And both of the families that adopted me raised me that way. Dominic just entered into the studio, or he's trying to, and Gabriel's just having a little issue with sharing mommy space with his cat brother, Dominic. If you have any questions, anybody, go ahead and put them in the chat room. Feel free to do that. Those of you that are listening, if you want to join us in the chat room, it's pretty darn easy. So please go ahead and do that. Doorways into the unseen world sometimes happen to be opened through curiosity, through a teacher that perhaps doesn't understand where any given student is at or what the student is able to handle. Sometimes the gateways, the doorways, the portals to spirit are opened because, by God, that's what I'm going to do, and I don't care what anybody has to say. I know that I'm ready, and here I go. And here I go. And I've known enough people over the course of my 56 years that have opened doorways, that have danced with spirit that they weren't prepared to dance with, and then afterwards they're left to pick up the pieces, to retrieve parts of their soul that were perhaps taken, parts of their mental, emotional, spiritual lives that are now in chaos. Again, it's no different than me saying, I spent years playing softball in high school, so I think I'm going to go out and play with the Boston Red Sox next week. I think I'm going to do that because I was a really good player back in high school. Huh, Kelly? There is no way I know what my limits are. I've learned what my limits are with regard to spirit. Not everything that lies in the unseen realm is friendly. And that's okay because we learn from those spirits too, but how do we wish to learn? How do we wish to learn? Let me check the messages here. Sometimes I just get rolling. New Joy is saying, Julie is saying, not a game, not at all. I won't open that door. Right on. Hey, Nikki Jorgensen. New Joy is saying, when your spiritual door is so open, what is the best way to get grounded, rest, proper food, prayer, and some time of disconnecting to the outside world? Absolutely. She's saying, my head has been spinning with the door of psychic emotion to the world blown wide open. Well, it is, there are a variety of ways that we are open. Sometimes it's spontaneous, right? Some people have spontaneous openings to their psychic, spiritual abilities. And yes, absolutely. What are you surrounding yourself with? Who are you surrounding yourself with? What is your daily routine for entering into your life? For me, before my feet hit the floor, I am in prayers of gratitude. Thank you for this day. Thank you for my life. Guides, guardians, allies, angels, thank you for walking with me. Ancestors, blood of my blood, bone of my bone, thank you for protecting me, walking with me, keeping me from all harm. And harm comes in many ways, and most harm is not always physical. Harm comes in a whole lot of different forms. So bringing to us the allies from spirit that we walk with every day. Most of us who grew up Catholic were taught the guardian angel prayer. There's a reason for that. We all know about saints. If you grew up in a Catholic household, you know all about the saints. There's a saint for just about everything, and so you can invite them to walk with you as well. And you don't have to be Catholic to understand about saints and its ascended masters. But calling to us our allies, the Creator, right? For those of you that, walk along the path with Yeshua ben Joseph. Yeshua, thank you for walking with me today. Whatever that happens to be. Hopefully we're watching who it is we're hanging out with on the physical plane. Keeping an eyeball on those that are in our physical realm. We need to do the same thing with our spiritual life. We need to understand who it is that we're walking with. It's one of the reasons that Sister Irene Mary asked me to write the book, Embracing the Mystic Within. Spirit guides are real, whether we want to believe it or not. In fact, for those of you that live here in the West Michigan area, on January 5th, I have been invited to be a guest lecturer at the Unity Church of Practical Christianity in Walker. And they have asked me to do a 90-minute presentation on spirit guides. And later today, I'll post that on the Facebook group page, Temple Within School of Sacred Studies. What is the cost of that? I determined that the cost of that would be a donation, free will donation to Gathering Thunder Foundation. So whatever it is that you can afford for that particular class. Learning about spirit guides. What are they? Who are they? How do they speak to us? How do we know what's an imposter? Maybe we'll talk about that next week. Posers on the other side of the veil. Sometimes people will say to me, Denise, I'm ready. I am ready to come to that class at your school. And my intuition or my understanding of where they are spiritually and their spiritual education says to me, no, they're really not. And sometimes I say to people, well, I don't think that you're fully ready for that. And some people actually get really angry at me, like I'm attacking them personally, like I'm calling them an ignoramus or less than. When in fact, any good teacher will say to you, perhaps you're not ready for this at this time. But when you are ready, I'm willing to teach you. It was years and years before Wakian said to me, I'm gifting you with that pipe and that altar, that hochoka. At first, I didn't want the pipe. I didn't want the hochoka. I wasn't going to open that door of responsibility for the ceremonies, for the spirit world that comes with it, for the lessons that come with it, for myself, for what I needed to learn, how I needed to educate myself, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. I didn't want it. And when the time came, years into the training, I wasn't even aware that I was going to be gifted the hochoka or the pipe that particular evening. And yet I was. My sister Barbara was there. And there it was in my lap. He said, you're ready now. I wasn't even sure at that point I was ready for that. I wasn't ready to do readings for people, to sit with people, to do sessions with people. Spiritual counseling, I prefer to call it. I had lots and lots of practice with Sister Irene and a couple of other wonderful Dominican nuns before I felt that I was ready. It was a long time in learning. People say, well, where do I begin? Where do I begin learning about what's on the other side of the doorway? Well, you can begin by not necessarily Googling everything, but maybe going to a library, maybe going to a bookstore, maybe asking a friend who's also on the path, what books would you recommend? What lecturers would you recommend that I see? Lots of wonderful ways to study. My first question to everyone is what is your question about spirit? Where is your passion at this moment? What is it that you want to learn about? If you want to learn about psychic protection, New Joy, the fact of the matter is, I'm glad that you're asking that question. I'm really glad you're asking that question. I would never have thought, to put my daughter up on her horse for the very first time without her having a riding helmet. Right? She's 26 years old, and if I'm out at the stable and she's in the arena riding bow and I don't see her with a helmet on, she's in a grown woman, and I will stop her on her big old horse, and he's a big one, and make her put her helmet on. When we're walking the pathways of spiritual learning, whether it's about angels or spirit guides, or maybe it's about Kabbalah, or any, numerology, astrology. There are so many wonderful avenues, healing, shamanic work. Beginning at the beginning often means finding a teacher who will take you from the beginning and layer what it is that you're learning at a pace that is appropriate. Because the bullies on the other side of the veil are always saying to themselves, wringing their hands together. Oh, here's a good one, right? This one's open. This one thinks he knows a whole lot. Let's teach him the hard way what he doesn't really know. Sometimes we call that the way of Heyoka, the contrarian, the clown. And I've learned those ways as well. I have learned those ways as well. When somebody says, I really want to get on the spiritual path, I often say to them, then you need to be ready to unlearn everything that you've ever known. And you need to be ready to lose everyone and everything that you have in your life. Because when we walk on a spiritual path, and we really make it a walk, we're not just a weekend warrior kind of a thing. When you walk the path, there's great loss, there's great joy, there's great gain, but it's balanced with loss. It had been 20 years since I saw Charmaine, my spiritual director. And last winter she got a hold of me and she said, hey, don't you think it's time for you and I to go and have breakfast together? Well, her son Michael owns a great place over in East Town called the Cherie Inn. So we met for breakfast, and she looked at me, and she's such a dear soul. And she said to me, Denise, in these 20 years I've followed the course of your life. And I've been watching very closely what you've been doing. And always when I think of you, I think to myself, how great have her losses been? How great have her losses been in pursuit of her spiritual life? And she started to weep. And I said, well, Charmaine, you never told me all those years ago that the losses would be as great as they've been. And she said, well, they're different for everybody. But those of us that continue on the path of our spirit, listening to the voice of our soul, while we gain so much, we lose so much. Family members that no longer understand, friends that wonder, where did my friend go, right? Family members, friends, co-workers that distance themselves from us because they don't understand who we're becoming or who we've become and why we just can't stay who we were. Well, when you open the door to your soul, that door cannot be closed. We can try to wedge that sucker shut, but it's going to pop back open. And the path begins. I would rather take the path that's meant for my soul, and rather than just bust through every door that my ego thinks I'm ready for, listen to the voice of my soul and my guides and my teachers and my mentors here on the earth plane to understand where it is that I should go next. I don't want them to tell me where to go next. That's called having a guru, and I'm not into the whole guru thing. I don't want to be responsible for telling anyone what to do on their spiritual journey. Neither do I want to be told exactly what I need to do and when to do it. Opening spiritual doors means that we are opening the gateway to the wisdom of our soul and seeing the world in a different way, the physical world and the non-physical world. And when we see things and feel things and understand things in a different way, not everyone that we are associated with understands our new understanding. And that's okay. They're not meant to. They're not meant to. Who it is that greets us on the other side when we are ready to learn from them is no different than who greets us on this side. People ask me, Dana, so who are your teachers? Who's your mentor? Well, I always talk about Sister Irene Mary because I just love her. I adore her. And of course, Arval Looking Horse, his brother Ivan, who put me in my Hochaka recently for my vision quest. I stay very close to them. My brother Guy, I was just having a long conversation with him. My mentors, my teachers come in many different forms. Some of my greatest teachers are the animals that live out here in the enchanted forest. What I've learned in my 56 years is that rather than run headlong into something, perhaps sitting and being with it and praying about it, praying with it, is the best thing to do before I open a door. And at no time in my own spiritual learning, when I'm taking it to the next level or the next, I don't know that there are necessarily levels, it's just a progression in what we're learning, I will ask the question, right? Earlier this year when I was sitting with Arval Looking Horse in his kitchen and he and I were having a conversation, and he and I talked about some things, and he's a very honest mentor about whether or not I'm ready or he sees me as ready. And I don't, not that I put him up on some golden pedestal, because he is a human being after all, we all are. I take deeply into consideration what it is that he tells me, what he shares with me, what he feels I'm ready for. And then I take it into my own soul for consideration. On the other side of the veil, as they say, it's not all angelic choirs singing the praises of the Lord. Ooh, goodness. Lori Bruno. I just spent some more time with her in Salem this year. I'll never forget my question to her. Does it ever get any easier, Lori? She looked at me, she said, no, it doesn't get easier, this path of spirit, the path of soul. I said, oh God, I was hoping that you were going to tell me it just gets easier. And she said, no. Always remember, Denise, that the degree of light that you wield will always be met by that same degree of darkness. That's how we grow. And are we prepared for what we're going to rub up against to polish us, right? We're always being polished. And in order to be polished, there's a rub of some sort. There's some static. As a teacher, I have to be very mindful of perhaps the rub that any given student is prepared to endure in order to be polished to the next. And sometimes, there are mental and emotional things that need to be cleared up before we move on to the next. And that's okay. I can't go downhill skiing if my leg is broken, right? I'm going to repair that broken leg before Todd gets me, back at Cannonsburg. My leg is not broken, by the way, but as a metaphor. So if I have a mental and emotional situation going on that I'm being cared for by a therapist or a doctor, I'm going to make sure that that's taken care of and well balanced before I go on to the next level of understanding the spiritual ways that come with carrying my pipe. I'm not going to rush headlong in trying to learn something or walk more deeply into spirit if I know that I have something inside my heart, mind, or soul that needs to be balanced. And if I'm told that this is the end, this is where the learning ceases, my soul may say, this is good for now. No different than Dane saying, well, thank you for inviting me to play at the World Hockey Academy. But you know what? I think I have a different idea in mind for the rest of my life. And he was okay with that. I had a harder time with that as the mom wanting to cheer him on. If your soul says, just stay right here, stay put. You're good right here. Stay where you are in this moment and learn more about where you are in this moment. Heal yourself where you are in this moment. Become balanced where you are in this moment. Relish, savor this moment, then I say do that. It doesn't mean that you're less than. It doesn't mean that you're an imbecile when it comes to spirituality. What it means is that you're honoring your soul's path. And sometimes there are breaks along the path. Do I think I'll ever be a you weepy woman? I don't know about that, frankly. And I would never attempt to be one. I've seen what happens when somebody attempts to be a you weepy woman and they weren't properly trained. And I've seen people in those ceremonies be injured mentally and emotionally and spiritually. I remember asking that woman, were you really trained to do that? Who trained you to do that? My friend was injured in your ceremony last night. Who told you you could do that ceremony? And she looked at me and she said, well, my teacher told me I wasn't ready, but I know that I am. Oh, goodness, that was a conversation. Tara Rietberg, I'm pretty sure, will never forget the conversation I had with that woman at that moment. Next week when we are together, we'll talk about, who's beyond those doors that you really don't need to mess around with if you ain't ready to mess around, right? You shouldn't be messing where you shouldn't be messing. I think that Nancy Sinatra sang something about that. These boots are made for walking, right? Don't be messing where you shouldn't be messing. Enjoy your life in your spiritual life where you are right now. Make the most of it. I know people who hop from one thing to the next, hoping to find the next hit, the next high. In spirituality, people can become addicted to opening the next door, thinking that that fix beyond that door is going to fill their soul, when their soul is asking them just to sit for a minute and talk. Our soul is calling to us every day, Dana, would you sit for just a minute? Do you have to whirl off into this next thing? Sit for a minute. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to be with you. If a spiritual door is closed or you're unsure of it, sit with that. Why is it closed? Maybe we're not supposed to know. Am I supposed to open it? Sit with that. Talk to your soul about it. Ask a mentor about it. Ask a dear friend if you feel so inclined. Don't ask too many people, though, because people have a lot of opinions about a whole lot of stuff. That's also a lesson in and of itself, people's opinions, people's thoughts. With that, everybody, get out there today and shine your light as only you can shine it. And for those of you that yesterday or any time during this past year have given to Gathering Thunder Foundation, I want to give you a great big thank you for that. And invite you to join me on January 5th at the Unity Church of Practical Christianity on Walker Avenue in Walker, Michigan, from 10 a.m. until noon. And I've got a new website up as part of my DeniseIwana.com website. If you care to take a look, it's simply called schoolofsacredstudies.com. It's a work in progress, but I think you might enjoy some of the offerings that are already up and posted for 2019. With that, everybody, have a beautiful day. Thank you for shining your light. It's time to get out there and shine it as only you can. Blessings be, everyone.